Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. Also, do not forget to check out the America's Founding series on the P.A.S. Report, where I talk about patriots that have been lost to history that help define what this country is all about, create the American identity, and more importantly, fight for things like liberty and freedom. And that's why I have a great guest coming on the program today. I have Steve Friend. He's a whistleblower, a suspendable, and a former FBI special agent. He's also the host of the American Radicals podcast. You go to the PAS report and link to the episodes for it. Steve, great to have you on. I have to ask, are you still actively suspended by the FBI, or are you a former FBI agent?
I'm a recovering FBI agent under advisement of counsel. They told me I was likely to be charged with a crime if I didn't resign, so I did that in February 2023, but it's been 966 days since I was indefinitely suspended forever.
It really is amazing, because you were actually one of the earliest voices that was exposing the corruption, the politicization, and the abuses of power within the FBI. I mean, I remember watching your hearing along with Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen testimony for Congress. And since then, we haven't seen many changes. Now, with the election of Trump in November, he appoints, obviously, Kash Patel as director, Deputy Director Dan Bongino. Are you surprised that we haven't seen any real reforms?
I think that I was expecting, like most people, to see a shock and awe campaign, just going off of what Dan Bongino and Kash Patel said publicly. I mean, certainly that was the concern when Kash was going through the confirmation period, right? All the Democrats that were up there on the Hill grilling him and trying to spike his nomination to become the director were saying that he was going to convert the FBI into this government gangster-seeking mission focus. But I think there's a fundamental difference in what my expectations and maybe others have in the approach that they've actually taken. I think that they've gone in with a winning hearts and minds sort of attitude, a presumption that there are lots of good men and women in the FBI, and they just need to be reoriented towards rigorous obedience to the Constitution, and everything will be hunky-dory. Whereas if I had my druthers, I want to see shock and awe. And if that involves a level of collateral damage via people losing their careers who are actually one of the few good men and women of the FBI, well, that's just the cost of doing business, and it's not irreversible. We can always bring those people back.
I understand those sentiments completely, because the reality is there are reforms that can be done relatively quickly, where it's not about investigating potential FBI agents for crimes they may have committed and doing prosecutions. I understand that takes time, but when it comes to, let's say, reinstating someone like Garrett O'Boyle, that's the stroke of a pen, correct?
It is. Look, Garrett was suspended just like me, a week after me, actually. And the FBI's own security division conducted an investigation and determined that the reason that they suspended him was erroneous. The reason was that they said he leaked information to Project Veritas. And it's been verified that he didn't, in fact, do that. He should have been reinstated henceforth, but it didn't happen, and he's continued to be in this purgatory now for over 900 days, coming up on 1,000 here of unpaid indefinite suspension. So yes, there's a stroke of a pen, and it's Supreme Court doctrine. It's Navy versus Egan, wide latitude towards members of the intelligence community of who they give a security clearance to. They can revoke it for any reason. There's really not an appeals process. And I would like to see that used aggressively and energetically against people on the inside of the FBI. And look, put them in the same situation that I was put in and that Garrett was put in. And if they can determine that there's no fault here on there, that we can bring them back, and no harm, no foul. But that hasn't been done, and that's just one sort of element that they can go to. They can also do things like things that I've advocated for. They should eliminate the intelligence collection apparatus entirely. They could eliminate the quota system that they are still operating underneath immediately, and that's not legislation. There's no law.
Can you explain the quota system to the audience, because they're not familiar with that?
Yeah, so it's called Integrated Program Management, IPM. It sounds very government speak. It's straight from McKinsey. It effectively creates a quota for the number of intelligence products and cases that have to be opened and arrests and tools that have to be used. And it turns law enforcement on its head because it's not making widgets in a factory, but your theoretical job when you're working in law enforcement is to bring crime down, but now it perversely incentivizes the Bureau to bring the numbers up, and they'll do that legitimately by doing good work, but more often they're just working smarter, not harder. Why would I open up one case with 4 bad guys when I could open up 4 cases with 1 bad guy and play the numbers games so that I can go back to Congress and say, look, you gave us $10 billion last year, give us $11 billion, look at all the good work. And they really take it down into the very minutia because individuals are incentivized, not just to promote because they hit their quota, but because their boss gets a financial award because you hit a certain quota. You got senior executives making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 because their subordinate arrested the right number of people.
That's insane. When you take a civil service job, you're not supposed to be getting bonuses at taxpayer expense. And I think it does corrupt the system, obviously, because people want those bonuses and they're going to push for more and more cases. And that's going to be part of the hiring metric, the promoting metric. And so it encourages bad behavior. Do you think that's where the Catholic memo came out, the Richmond product? Do you think it was based on the quota system, or do you think that was even more nefarious where it was based on ideological grounds?
I don't think that's mutually exclusive. I think it's not if or, it's and also. So that's an individual who was politically motivated and also on top of that benefited because it was one of the intelligence product that he was responsible for authoring. He was an intelligence analyst working for the FBI, effectively paid a government salary to write term papers and responsible for writing 3 or 4 intelligence products for the Bureau for that given fiscal year. But then the downstream consequences are that product is imbibed and laundered into the operations and then used to message how, well, next year's quota, we are dealing with this problem of these radical Catholics, so maybe we should make that a higher priority. That is, after all, a racially motivated violent extremism, ergo domestic terrorism, because they're engaged in wrong thing from our perspective. So there is a bureaucratic reason and an ideology.
God forbid, Catholics believe in 2 genders and traditional family units, and so they must be domestic terrorists. It really is amazing. Now, we know that the Richmond product came obviously from the Richmond office, but it actually went operational in places like California and I believe either Oregon or Washington. Do you know if any of the people that engaged in the Richmond product have been terminated?
None. Actually, Christopher Wray admitted that when he was grilled by the Senate Judiciary Committee. I believe Josh Hawley asked him. He said that, no, they hadn't actually taken any sort of corrective action. And
well, I know Wray didn't do anything. I'm talking about now Director Patel and Deputy Director Bongino.
No, and the special agent in charge of the Richmond field office, Stanley Meter, he is still in that position. He was the ultimate authority at that time, still there, and I've seen him posing at press conferences with the director.
Yeah, and to me, that's one of those things where it's simple. You just terminate those employees. It doesn't take 6 months of investigation. I mean, Christopher Wray was like, we're doing an internal investigation that lasted 2.5 years and never got any answers to Congress. But Congress is also part of the problem. I'll get back to the bureaucracy in a minute. But what annoys me about Congress is they trot you out there. They trotted Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen. We've seen other people testify. They put on this big dog and pony show for the cameras. They feign their outrage. And I'm talking about Republican lawmakers here. How often has members of Congress been in touch with you about the abuses within the FBI after the congressional hearing a couple of years ago?
Almost none. The last contact that I had with Jim Jordan was May 18th, 2023, the day that we testified. I've done a private meeting. There was a private breakfast with some of the members of the House Freedom Caucus that wanted me to do a presentation. I was able to communicate with them a little bit. That was about 1.5 years ago. I've had members of staff from my own senator here in Florida reach out to me and just kind of query what my situation was. It was sort of a mystery to them, even though I'd publicly testified on national television. They were unaware that I had done that, and I filled them in, and then they said, well, that was before the election. So they said, hopefully the election goes the right way, and then something good happens for you. But really, there isn't very much interest because it's like you said, it's a dog and pony show. It's an opportunity for them to get in front of the cameras, to preen, hopefully get on cable news, maybe boost their Twitter following, which is one of the criteria that they use typically for bringing in witnesses. I heard on good authority that they like like to get people with a large followership on social media. And if you happen to have a smaller, then you'll get bumped in favor of somebody who's maybe less qualified to answer the questions. And then they can also fundraise off of it, which is basically all they're seemingly interested in at this point.
It's so ridiculous. And when we look at the bureaucracy, we have to understand that the swamp is a powerful force. I mean, the bureaucracy is extraordinarily powerful. As we saw under the last administration, some would argue the bureaucracy has a hell of a lot more power than the President of the United States. And I think that we witnessed it under this administration. I want to get your thoughts on what you felt when you had the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, announced to the world that she was releasing the Epstein file. And then the next day, it was all information that was already released. Do you think the bureaucracy set her up for failure to look like a fool?
I know that they did to a certain extent, because you had James Dennehy, who was the assistant deputy in charge of the New York field office, who got the directive to hand over that information to the FBI director and to the Attorney General of the United States. He resisted in doing that, and the consequences were for that he was forced to retire, collect his pension, and then walked out of the office to the standing thralls and ovations of hundreds of employees with a bagpipe and color guard ceremony. So he was certainly celebrated. I think, though, just as a matter of principle here, they painted themselves sort of into a corner on that. The fact of the matter is that it wouldn't impact your life or my life or just about anybody in your audience's life, unless Bill Gates is one of your members of your audience, to know who is on the list, right? What would be better, I think, is for us to know, hey, we stood up a task force and we're investigating 200 or 300 people that are on there, and we can't jeopardize those ongoing investigations. But unfortunately, they came forward and said, we're going to hand over the list, and now they're having to deal with the consequences of it. And it's not just bad PR. It's an impression that's being left on the workforce, on the personnel there, who are saying, oh, maybe you don't have the momentum of new leadership that's going to come in and change the status quo. Maybe I'll just put my head down here and realize that it doesn't matter who is here as the boss. They come and they go, Hobbs, and I'm just going to go along and deal with things because my incentive is to keep my job, because I saw what happened to Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen.
Yeah, just wait it out. And I think when it comes to someone like the Attorney General of the United States, she should have reviewed that information before she put it out there. They set her up for failure, and obviously it damaged her reputation significantly. And I think you're right. It's not necessarily the names on that list that's important. To me, the bigger thing is, how did Epstein really die? What were the real failures in the Bureau of Prisons, and why don't we know about that? But there's so many investigations that we don't know about. The National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism is something that I extensively covered here at the P.A.S. report. I constantly harp on it. It should have been rescinded on day one of this administration, because that served as the catalyst to target parents, to target Catholics, and target anyone that was deemed a MAGA threat tag and whatnot. When it comes to issues like the national strategy and the bureaucracy, how do they use the tools available to them to disguise their work? Right? They claim that it's about combating domestic terrorism, but really it's pushing a political agenda.
Oh, this is my love language, and I'm really thankful that Tulsi Gabbard turned that information over and made it publicly available, because it is the Rosetta Stone for what we saw. Look, just as background, September 11th happens, and September 12th, we got the decision for all our chips in this country. Do you want liberty or do you want security? And we opted for security, and as Benjamin Franklin said, we frankly deserve neither as a result. So we got the Patriot Act, which enhanced the national security apparatus, particularly in the FBI, gave them the ability to do things like monitor people. They could open up assessments, which is effectively an investigation on someone without any sort of probable cause, reasonable suspicion, or even an allegation of crime. It just has to be an articulable purpose. And it reoriented the FBI into what it currently is, which is an analogy to me is Skynet from the Terminator, because in the movie series, it's artificial intelligence. Skynet becomes self-aware, ones and zeros, not good, not bad, just is. And then it comes to the conclusion that anyone who wants to unplug it is the threat. So it targets the people. Effectively, that's what happened to the FBI. It's a bureaucracy. It's interested in growing and getting more personnel and funding and manpower and goodies and capabilities. And then it came to the conclusion that anyone who wants to pare that back were the enemy. So they devolved the mission set. They evolved it and effectively devolved it into originally going after bad actors, people who were going to be terrorists, people who were subscribing to an ideology that was necessary for them to engage in violence and then through fear to achieve political outcomes. And then they said, well, let's evolve it into homegrown violent extremist, and then domestic violent extremist, militia violent extremist, moms at school board meetings, people praying outside of abortion clinics, and now the anti-government, anti-authority violent extremist, agave, which the FBI co-authored a strategic intelligence assessment with the Department of Homeland Security in 2021, where they defined an agave as someone who has a perception of government overreach or negligence or illegitimacy, not and, or. So you object to wearing a mask when you fly, that could be overreach. Now you could be defined as a domestic terrorist, and they could open up an assessment on you and keep it open as long as they need, and they'll find the vulnerable person to entrap effectively through a system of grooming to agree to do their worst ideas, something that they were never capable of or predisposed to even do, so that they can come back to Congress and say, look how many terrorists we popped. And we are just entering right now into the era of artificial intelligence, which nobody's talking about, because we're all subject to collection. I mean, you have the Executive Order 12333, which opened the floodgates, gave the FBI the capability to just look through whatever the NSA hoovers up on all Americans, but there's still 35,000 employees. We have 350 million people living here, so you might be getting collected on, but you're not necessarily being surveilled. Artificial intelligence can do all of that. You don't even need the workforce to do it. And that doesn't say anything about the artificial intelligence through software like the program called Overwatch, which sends bots out onto the internet to target people and present itself as a friendly and then entrap them for the government.
And I don't think most people know it's either the NSA or the DOD. I forget which one exactly. They have a program called Skynet. And I'm like, why the hell would you name it Skynet? It didn't work out for the human beings in the end. But that's the stupidity of government. But you bring up a good point, because when I look at the national strategy, I wrote government documents before in emergency management and homeland security, so I know how they're crafted. I know how many people review these things before they actually go public, and immediately it caught my eye. And this is 31 pages, people. Go out there and read it yourself. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Steve's word for it. Just read it for yourself. It brings up anti-government sentiment or anti-authority sentiment. And you're right, when it talks about government overreach, well, it's based on perceived overreaches. It doesn't define what anti-government, anti-authority is. And if I believe that the government is overreaching, well, only the ones I'm accusing of abusing their power, only they get to determine if they're abusing their power. That's how idiotic this whole thing is. But it was done intentionally. Are you shocked that out of everyone in this administration, that a Democrat, Tulsi Gabbard, is the only one that really seems like she's trying to clean house, expose the corruption of the last administration? What are your thoughts on that?
Integrity is only a problem if you got it. I think if I sat down with Tulsi Gabbard, she's one of the few people on the political left who I could actually have a conversation with and not maybe necessarily agree on a large, huge swath of issues, but I don't think she wants to put me in a concentration camp. So I think she's really well siloed in that position, and I'm grateful that she's done it. The problem is that, from what I'm hearing, the resistance within the intelligence community is something like 80% of the people who work in that space are resisting what she's doing and are actually trying to thwart what the Trump administration is on its face claiming that it wants to do, which is just root out all this corruption.
That's the way the swamp feeds itself. They understand that their power is threatened, and so they're trying to strike back, and we see this constantly. And that's why we need people with courage in these positions, statesmen and women that look beyond the political politics of the day. Because to all those on the left, I mean, they don't realize how Trump could easily use the national strategy just in the other direction, and so they should wake up too. But it wasn't hard to see after 9/11. I understand it was a good intent by the public officials that they wanted more security and they developed the Patriot Act. But it really wasn't rocket science to see, well, once the threat of this idea of Al-Qaeda is limited, well, we have to justify our jobs. We have to justify our position. And so we're going to target the American people. And we saw the PRISM program from NSA break out after that. The expansion of not just the FBI and its intel functions, but Homeland Security, particularly CISA that wanted, Jen Easterly, she wanted to control cognitive functions. Infrastructure, she wanted to call it. Cognitive infrastructure. We saw it with the United States Postal Service and the ICOP program. Why do they view the people as such a threat?
It goes back to what Harvey Silverglade asked, a very simple question in the book, Three Felonies a Day. Why do we have laws? Do we have laws because there's a social compact here and the law is the shield? It's the ability to protect the American people against fraud and force. That's what the government's job is. It's supposed to be a beacon for your good. Or is it another arrow in its quiver to go after people that it finds to be engaging in wrongthink? People that, in the government's perspective, well, they're getting a little too close to the line, and maybe I can reorient or reread the law here so that the line is actually behind where you're standing. And the fundamental belief is that if you're getting close to the line, you get both feet in bounds, it's a catch. You know, that's called legal. But now we have a very aggressive and energetic government bureaucracy, which is incentivized to do that for its own political gain, for its own financial gain, for its own bureaucratic and administrative gain, to reinterpret the law and go after the American people because it sees them as an opportunity to do that rather than the customer, the people who they're supposed to protect against fraud and force.
And what are your thoughts or ideas on removing that incentive?
I think that that's the baseline interest that we should have. There should be like a zero baseline budget as to what these government entities should do. Do you want to engage in things that we as a society, as we the people agree is an objectively good thing? Well, then we empower you to do that and we fund you to do that. It shouldn't be operating off of what was our funding last year and can we up it a little bit? You start at $0 and then justify your existence. And if we need to pare it back, then we will. And I think that there are certain policy changes, certain philosophical changes that we can even have here. And you're hoping as we're at the end of the slippery slope, right, from the Patriot Act of 2001, where we saw it at its full mask ripped off during the Biden administration, back to the Niemöller poem of first they came for the trade unionists, then the socialists and the Jews, and I didn't speak out. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. We saw that happen. And now we have the opportunity to pare that back and actually opt for the belief in living in a libertarian society, freedom rather than security. And let's just accept that there are certain inherent risks to that. Let's fundamentally rethink things like, why does the federal government have guns at a law enforcement perspective? Shouldn't they be there to liaise with locals and help them, help that sheriff whose quota system doesn't operate because he has to bring crime down or he loses his position? Let's make the FBI a Bureau of Investigation that's unarmed, as it was as originally intended to be in the early 1900s. But those are the sorts of things that people can't seem to wrap their head around because the FBI and other agencies like it rely on pop culture, and everybody thinks that what they see in TV and movies is the agent chasing down bad guys is actually a thing. And that's not what it is in reality. The reality is we have a robust law enforcement in this country at a state and local level, and we should be doing everything we can to small r Republicanize the way that we do things, so that if we take the teeth out of the attack dog of the federal government, then regardless of who the president is, you don't have to be fearful of the attack dog. There's no SWAT team coming to get you at 6 o'clock in the morning, Nick, if there's no SWAT team.
I think that when we look at most of the arrests, most of them are done at the state and local level. The FBI may swoop in and press charges if they hit, but it's usually the state and local government officers that are ones who are on the front line. What should the FBI's top priorities be right now? Again, we've seen how the agency has grown. We've seen the abuses of power. We've seen what they're targeting. In terms of national security, what should their priorities be instead of their obsession with political narratives and manufactured domestic terrorists? What should the priorities be?
I think that the greatest threat to the American people is weaponized government at this point. So if I had my druthers here, we need to just take the FBI out of the equation entirely. Now, if you are loath to remove the agency, what I would do is reorient it to be a servant of local law enforcement who is incentivized to bring crime down. Now, separate of that, if you won't even go that far and make it 100% subservient to the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, where the sheriff says, hey, I'm not interested in you going after moms who went to the school board meetings, but I have some drug problems here in this corner from Tren de Aragua. Can you help me there? Then there are a few things that I think that the American people can get behind and should get behind. Number one, and you can see them advertising it, but it needs to be enhanced even more, is child sexual abuse material. CSAM, child exploitation, human trafficking. The fact of the matter is that you could fully assign every single agent in the FBI to working just that matter, and they would
But I have to interrupt you for a second, because when it comes to human trafficking, we'll say, I just saw a video just released 2 weeks ago of a criminal illegal alien. His name was Abrego Garcia. He was pulled over by Tennessee Highway Patrol. They knew human trafficking was going on with the 8 individuals in the vehicle, $1,400 cash in his pocket. Tennessee Highway Patrol calls the FBI and ICE. The FBI says, take pictures of them and let them go on their way. ICE says, yeah, we're not going to come and detain them. And it was clear human traffic's going on. And this is at the same time they were targeting Catholics and parents at school board meetings and those that support Trump. And so didn't the FBI actually enable human trafficking by ignoring a human trafficker?
They 100% did. But here's the sad part and sad reality. Human trafficking, child exploitation is the lowest priority in the FBI.
Why?
Well, I think that you set up these quotas, and then whatever you ask for, you will get more of. And I think there's actually a societal issue here. People are really uncomfortable with the idea of what goes on in the deep, dark corners of our society that goes across all socioeconomic, race, creed, whoever you are in society. People don't want to think about the fact that one of their neighbors likely has 40,000 images of 2-year-olds being sodomized. They would much rather see their law enforcement stand up there with the suit and tie or maybe the blue raid coat and say, look, we got dope on the table, we got money, we got guns, we took down this vile, vicious, violent gang, and we're happy with that. We don't want to think about the problems, and that's why you get every now and then a blip on the radar, a sound of freedom arouses people's attention, but that kind of faded away pretty quickly. Nobody wants to think about it. It's to the point now where we need to rethink how we do law enforcement at every level in this country, because if you want to become a cop, wherever it is at level, you need to answer in the affirmative to 2 questions. Will you carry a firearm? Will you use force if it is necessary? If you answer no, you're out. If you answer yes, then we'll vet you, we'll train you, we'll allow you to enter the process. There needs to be a third question. Will you work child exploitation matters? Because right now, particularly in the FBI, you can say, I don't want to do that, and you will receive that accommodation. You're talking
That's
about
amazing. I no matter what job I had, I don't think I ever said the words, I don't want to do that to my superiors. And they were like, oh, okay, don't worry about it. It's okay. I mean, that's completely ridiculous. And I remember, as I was leaving the New York State Office of Emergency Management, one of the last jobs we were doing, the Super Bowl was coming to New Jersey. And so we partnered with federal agencies to go to the hotels and brief them on what to look for when it comes to human trafficking. Now, that was well over a decade ago. So times have changed, but I really think it's amazing that you have FBI agents saying, I don't want to work cases like that, and management just supports it. That's insane to me.
They set up an infrastructure for you to actually opt out of it. They could look. I was willing to take that on. I'm kind of a black sheep. I should be somebody that they were like very happy to have, because I said, look, it's horrible stuff, but I can compartmentalize it because it gives me the opportunity to put some of the worst people in prison for a very long time, and to work with local partners, guys who are overburdened with cases and maybe don't have the technological apparatuses in place to bring these cases forward. And instead I was told, hey, you probably should go to this 3-day event in some very tropical location with your wife. It's sort of a on the sly vacation, and then tell them that you're getting a little bit of PTSD and you don't want to work it anymore. When I was effectively reassigned to work on domestic terrorism, I was told that child sexual abuse material, which is child pornography, was not a priority for the Jacksonville field office going forward. And any complaints that came forward should be referred to local police or sheriff's deputies to work, because we weren't working that. It wasn't a priority.
Crazy, because let's be honest here. To me, those are the most evil and worst people in the world. I mean, you can't get lower than that.
And just at its core, why did you click apply? I mean, I actually sent a physical application in, because that's how long ago it was. But why did you apply? To put bad guys in jail? Because the most active squads in any field office across the country for the FBI are the violent crimes against children squads, because they can set up and get somebody just about every single day. But I know people right now who have volunteered to work that, and they're being told, well, the quota says we have to have somebody assigned to domestic terrorism, so we would prefer you to sit at the desk even though you don't have a domestic terrorist case. You have no casework to do. Sit there in color rather than go out and help the violent crimes against children.
That's why I love having you on, you, George Hill, all you guys, because you know what's really going on out there, and you've been sounding the alarm for years. So what would your message be to the American people today? A lot of Americans have lost trust in their federal institutions, and rightly so. I mean, the federal government did it to themselves. These institutions did it to themselves. But they also feel helpless. And then you have the whole segment of Americans that just have no idea what's going on. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we are the ones that could bear enormous pressure to get action when it comes to government. Most of my students have no idea they could contact members of Congress's office, and they count those calls as like, every one call they get is like 1,000 calls. And so what would you tell the American people? What should they be doing to put pressure on Congress? Because ultimately, that's where the solutions will come. Is Congress, because even if one administration starts to cut things, the corruption and the abuse, if it's not codified through Congress, it could go right back to where it was in previous administrations. When it comes to child sex abuse, I mean, this is right up Congress's alley. Stricter penalties, they could pass laws. They could pass laws that this is now going to be the FBI's priority. What can people do?
Well, I think people can get very loud and obnoxious on social media. That's just the reality that we are in right now. These Congress people monitor X very closely, so that's something they can do. They kind of lick their finger and see where the social media narrative is going at this point. I really believe in the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. I think that people can empower the sheriff. They can lean on their state houses very effectively. Look, just personal anecdote. I live in Florida. I went to Tennessee, a state that I don't live in, and drafted legislation there that would have stood as a bulwark, as a speed bump to the weaponized FBI. And it was basically like a 2-sentence bill. And it said that in the event that a sheriff, police chief, somebody who is in executive leadership of an agency of law enforcement at state level, if they nominate one of their people to work for the FBI, that means that person gets a security clearance. That means that that person has access to information that they can't report back to their own police chief or sheriff, because that sheriff doesn't have a need to know. Well, in the event you nominate someone, then you have to read the sheriff in to what that person's working on. So therefore, the sheriff will know if his person, who's paid by the people there, that local constituency, and he effectively is supposed to have oversight of, is working on a mom going to a school board meeting or a real terrorist. And if the FBI is unwilling to do that, well, then we just don't provide them the manpower. And the FBI is only 35,000 people for a country at 350 million. Where do you think that they're going to put it? If they want to effectively hit their quotas, they're going to be comporting with what the sheriff deems to be something that is in line with what he wants to do in order to get reelected. So it sort of small r Republicanizes the way that we would do law enforcement. And if you lean on a member of your state house, that's somebody that'll go meet you for a cup of coffee. That's not Jim Jordan out there who hasn't returned Steve's friends calls in 2 years, and that's somebody who went and testified publicly. What does the average everyday American have the opportunity to talk to a congressman? Lean on your state house and maybe push forward that. And then those are the guys that are going to be the JV team. They're the minor leagues for people who endeavor to go to Washington. So that could be a way that we could actually affect change.
Absolutely. It would just be helpful if people knew that we had a system of federalism in place where we have 2 levels of government, the federal government and the state government, and they operate independently of each other and are not supposed to be dependent on each other. Unfortunately, our schools have totally failed, but that's a different story for a different day. Steve, always a pleasure to have you on. Everyone needs to check out the American Radicals podcast. I'll have links up at the P.A.S. Report podcast. Steve, thanks so much.
You got it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.